Well, hello and welcome to Photography with Imre, and that of course is me, and we have a really packed episode. It's going to be a little bit long, but it's just full of really good information on doing time-lapse photography and time-lapse movies. So without further ado, let's get started. Before getting headfirst into shooting a time-lapse series, let's quickly examine the ways you can take such photos. First off, there's the manual approach, which basically involves keeping your eyes on a timekeeping device like your watch and pressing the shutter button when needed, using a wireless remote control, or a remote shutter release cable. Although these methods work, some are a bit cumbersome to use, they keep the photographer heavily occupied, and if you're pressing the shutter button, then there's always the danger of nudging the camera, thus resulting in a slightly jerky movie. The more advanced and preferred methods employ the use of an intervalometer, which can be set to trigger the exposure at various time intervals. Some digital SLRs have this feature built in, which is nice, but in other cases there's often an electronic device that can be attached to the camera, or the camera can be controlled by software on a computer to which it's hooked up to. Now, one of the first things to start with when you're going to do a time-lapse movie is to consider your subject. Your subject will have a lot to do with the equipment you want to bring along, like the type of lenses, as well as, for example, what intervals you want to use. Maybe they're long intervals because you need to really speed up motion, or short intervals so you can get a lot of those finer details, smoother video. So think about what your subject is, and definitely consider, because, for example, if you're just going to go out and shoot a prairie with a blue sky and there's nothing at all happening, you might as well just take a picture or shoot a video and pan it around, because it's going to be a waste of time to do a time-lapse movie on such a subject. But for example, think about, for example, weather. Weather is a great one. Clouds moving or billowing like you can see in this time-lapse I shot a while ago. It's interesting. It's got a lot of movement going on in it. You can think of things like traffic, intersections where people are moving around, even some unusual subjects. For example, I did this one of bread dough rising. Subjects that are very slow and you can speed up their action. Those are great subjects to choose, and they will make your time-lapse movie a whole lot more interesting. So definitely consider your subject. It has a lot to do with pretty much everything else you are going to do when you're shooting a time-lapse series. Once you've determined your subject, it's important to plan out how you're going to be conducting the shoot, especially since you could be literally at it for several hours. So here are a few major things to consider. The playback rate of your video is very important, so decide what you'll be using, like 24 or 30 frames per second, for example. Consider the time interval you want to use between each photo. The longer the interval, the faster motion will appear, and to get smoother and slower motion, use a short time interval between shots. Think about which one your subject or scene would look better with, and I'll have more on my blog in regard to this. If you're going to be doing something more complex than just keeping the camera on one spot, consider drawing out a timeline. Here's an example. Notice the total length of the shoot given in frames and seconds. Then there are specific sections blocked off with a frame count to indicate where panning and zooming is going to take place and for what period of time. Even if you have an intervalometer, you'll likely need to do some things manually, so it's good to be ready. Now that you have a really good idea of how you're going to accomplish the shoot, it's important to be prepared, and I don't just mean packing your camera gear. If your time-lapse movie will be longer, let's say over 500 frames, then definitely ensure you remember to bring some extra batteries. Even if you have an intervalometer doing all the work for you, it's very likely that you're not going to leave your equipment unattended. This means you could potentially be stuck to your setup for several hours. So depending on your situation, remember to keep in mind food, something to drink, and if you need a washroom break, perhaps have a trusted friend with you to take over. In some cases, weather can be a factor, as time-lapse material is often shot outdoors. This doesn't just mean dressing right, it also means you might need to consider weatherproofing your gear if it isn't already. Okay, all of that is important to know, but now for the fun part. Let's discuss how to set up the camera for the shoot along with some other cool tips. First off, we'll start with image aspect ratios. Let's say we're going to end up with an HD format movie, which would translate to a 16:9 image aspect ratio. Images from full-frame and APS sensor-type cameras have an aspect of 2:3, while the 4/3 system is 4:3. This means that if you cannot set your digital SLR to the 16:9 ratio of HD, then be sure to take the framing of your scene into account. As you can see in this example, my 4:3 image will either have black bars on the left and right sides, or the image has to be cropped. Nowadays, most of us have high-capacity memory cards, sometimes more than one with us, so we can store hundreds or even thousands of photos before running out of space. But there is still the issue of whether you want to shoot in RAW or JPEG format. RAW, of course, provides photographers with higher quality and more flexibility to adjust various image parameters, whereas JPEG is faster to work with, takes up less space, and can still do the job if the exposure is where it needs to be. Ultimately, there's no real right or wrong answer necessarily, so you decide on which works better for your needs. Unless you want a terribly jerky time-lapse movie, a good sturdy tripod is a must. Also consider the type of head you'll need, assuming the tripod supports interchangeable ones. As you can see in the time-lapse movie I made for this show, I did a really quick pan. Using a 3-way or geared head like the one I'm showing here is a great way to achieve panning. Staying on that topic, if you keep your pans fairly slow and change the angle in small and equal increments, the effect can be quite pleasing. Before moving on to other effects you can create in your movies, I want to talk about the camera mode. In almost all situations, the best mode to use for shooting a time-lapse series is full manual, and I mean full manual. First off, the sensitivity or ISO, aperture, and shutter speed should be determined by the photographer. To get a good exposure, either a light meter can be used, or the trial and error method by taking a few test shots. Remember to check your histogram too. By doing this, each frame will be virtually identical in regard to exposure. If the camera is allowed to make metering decisions, then several frames could be either over or underexposed, thus causing a terrible strobe effect throughout the movie. In addition, I also recommend setting the white balance manually, along with focusing. Along the same lines, if the camera gets the white balance wrong on a few frames, or the autofocus system misses the target now and again, then those artifacts could spoil the movie. Okay, back to some more effects. If you have the means, moving the camera in a direction during shooting can add a three-dimensional quality to a time-lapse flick. In camera work lingo, this sideways motion is usually called tracking. There are many ways to accomplish this, from using a cheap children's toy wagon with the tripod riding on it to those professional, motorized, and expensive modular rail systems. For more info, check out my blog. If you happen to be shooting with a zoom lens, then you could also adjust the focal length ever so slightly between frames to zoom in or out of a scene. Just remember, keeping it slow and steady is more effective, and remember to check your focus frequently, as that could change too. Depending on the scene and subject you're shooting, consider using a slower shutter speed, one that would blur the action slightly. By doing so, time-lapse movies usually end up looking somewhat smoother. We're almost at the end, folks. Hold tight. Very often, most time-lapse movies have been made with time intervals that are equal. But consider deliberately varying the intervals to achieve an acceleration or deceleration effect. My movie starts out with 15-second gaps, then 10, 5, and finally 2.5 seconds. This gives you a little idea of what that deceleration could look like, for example. With some additional preparation and effort, a photographer can make this transition smoother for a really neat look. An interesting benefit to using a digital camera to shoot a time-lapse with is the amount of resolution you have at your disposal. The City Skyline movie I've been showing is heavily resized, but if I keep it to its original size, I can in essence zoom right into the picture, even move the sequence around, to basically create a new movie out of the same series of photos. Lastly, if you really like to conserve battery power, consider turning off the camera's display and image preview function, the one that shows you the shot for a moment after it's been taken. Since you're in manual mode, nothing should really change anyway, and if your time intervals are long enough, you could still preview a frame or two now and again to make sure everything is okay. And that's basically it for time-lapse photography. You put all those hundreds or even thousands of frames together to create your movie, and then you share it, you upload it, and you might find some surprises hidden in the video. Now, I do want you to check out my blog post on this, because I'll be including not only links to other sites about this topic and some really cool time-lapse movies out there. A good way to learn about time-lapse movies and photography and all that is to watch what other people have done. There's some beautiful work out there. But I'm also going to write a little bit more about that acceleration, deceleration, how you can work out the frames, and a few other thoughts that I have as well. So my blog, check that out. Facebook, Twitter links on there too. And by all means, please do subscribe so you can keep up to this stuff. And feel free to make video requests as well. Thank you, and I will see you next time. Take care.